Imagine that you're having a normal day, doing your daily routine. You get your work done, and when you're going home, suddenly and without advice, your vision becomes completely blurred, overwhelming your vision with a kind of white blindness. What would you do in that situation? José Saramago, in his powerful work Ensayo sobre la ceguera, published in 1999, constructs an allegory about human fragility, the loss of control, and social reconstruction in the face of chaos. The main plot is to show us what it's like to live in a pandemic of blindness through the perspectives of several characters, such as the girl with sunglasses, a little boy, an old man with cataracts, the first blind man, the wife of the first blind man, the ophthalmologist who examines the first blind man, and the ophthalmologist's wife, who incidentally ends up being the main character of the story, because among so many blind people, she's the only one who can see. The main plot is to show through the development of the characters, decision making in extreme situations, resource management, and leadership, it is possible to analyze the text from an administrative and strategic perspective.
The first topic is business and organization, the asylum as a microenterprise in crisis. In the novel, the government imprisons the first people infected with blindness in an abandoned asylum, which becomes an improvised microorganization. There emerge dynamics that are similar to those we used to see at many business organizations, like informal hierarchies, decision-making, resource allocation, and conflicts over power. This forced environment becomes a kind of dysfunctional organization, where there is no formal strategic management, but its necessity becomes evident.
Management, strategies, and actions. Survival as an organizational objective. When the order of society crumbles, the characters have to face a scenario where they must implement improvised strategies to survive. For example, when a group of blind interns sizes the food and distributes it in exchange for goods, and even for abuse of women. As we can see in Chapter 9, the lack of ethics and planning is evident. The absence of values, clear strategies, and coordinated actions produces chaos. This demonstrates the importance of strategic planning in any human group.
Resources and decision-making. Scarcity as a leadership trigger. In conditions of extreme scarcity, resource allocation becomes a key factor. Meanwhile, the food, hygiene, and security becomes key resources that must be managed, and those who have control over them have also power over the other blind interns. So, basically, decision-making in these circumstances shows the difference between destructive leadership, such as the armed blind men who extort food, and also constructive leadership, such as the doctor's wife, who leads with empathy and strategy.
Internal and external factors. Health crisis as a disruptive external factor. The outbreak of blindness represents an external factor that completely affects organizational and social structures. Internally, the characters must deal with fear, uncertainty, and moral decline. The play illustrates how external factors can force an organization or society to adapt or collapse, depending on its capacity for analysis and strategic response.
The next topic is about strategic leadership and strategic thinking. The doctor's wife was the only person who does not lose her sight and is a symbol of authentic strategic leadership. She monitors, disseminates information, makes difficult decisions, and manages resources, such as when she guides her group out of the asylum and then protects them in the city. Her leadership is not based on force or imposed authority, but on trust, empathy, and vision, both literal and symbolic, which are characteristics of strategic thinking.
Strategic administrators and managerial roles according to Mintzberg. The doctor's wife can be seen as a strategic manager who fulfills multiple Mintzberg roles. The first, interpersonal, in which she plays the role of leader by providing emotional guidance for her group. However, she also suits into the managerial role of liaison, connecting the group members with the outside world. Additionally, within the decision-making roles, she also acts as an entrepreneur, taking the initiative to seek, for example, food and shelter. Furthermore, she was also responsible for managing disturbances by addressing internal and external conflicts, as well as allocating resources, distributing food, space, and decisions. At the same time, she acted as a negotiator, managing relationships within and outside the group. Besides, the doctor's wife also fulfills informational managerial roles, for example, surveillance or monitoring, by constantly observing the group and its environment. She also played the role of disseminator, reporting and organizing based on what she observed. And, at the same time, she acted as a spokesperson, representing the group in front of others. Just as managerial roles were identified within the book, the difference between authority and power was also highlighted, topic seen and studied too during class. In this case, authority is reflected through the doctor's wife, since, despite the blindness, she listened to what they had to say, promoted the division of labor, and most importantly, always found solutions to problems. On the other hand, power was reflected in the man who carried a gun. Because he took advantage of people, his action always had particular objectives rather than a collective one. He used intimidation like a tool to achieve his goals. In addition, the doctor often takes on the creative role with the asylum, and he represents, in a way, everyone living in the same room. And, at the same time, he is also a negotiator, trying to talk the chief and the soldiers into providing more food.
Strategic planning process and types of strategy. The group led by the doctor's wife follows a basic strategic plan. The first stage is the diagnosis, or situational analysis, in which the conditions of the asylum are observed. Second, there is the formulation. We can see it when they decide to escape the chaos when it becomes unsustainable. This is followed by the implementation stage, where they move to the city in search of resources and shelter. And finally, the evaluation and control stage, where their movements are adjusted based on what they discover as the story progresses. In addition, the strategies implemented were survival, when the contingency strategy was generated, and then adaptation, where the transformation strategy was implemented in the face of the collapsed environment.
Organizational culture, power, and authority. Two types of culture are generated within the asylum. On one hand, we have a toxic culture based on violence, fear, and abusive power, while the culture promoted by doctor's wife is collaborative, with values of solidarity and empathy. This allows us to talk about organizational culture and how authority can be exercised from fear or respect. The contrast between the two groups of blind people illustrates the impact of culture on strategic results.
Foresight, prediction, forecast, and projection. The novel also serves as a prospective reflection. What happens when a society loses its vision, literally and metaphorically? The work is a projection of what happens when one loses one's way. In administrative terms, it shows what happens when an organization does not anticipate critical scenarios or have contingency strategies.
Situational analysis. When the main group leave the asylum, they constantly conduct a situational analysis of their surroundings. They assess the devastated city, the availability of food, the safety of shelters, and so on. This strategic tool allows them to adapt and survive. Situational analysis encompasses the past, present, and future, and thus, within it, we can find the following aspects. The first is the forecast, which refers to the development of generally probable future events. As we can read in the book, the authorities did not make a forecast, because if they had, they would have known, or partially at least, how the events would turn out. Next, we have prediction, which is based on deterministic theories and presents statements that attempt to be accurate regarding what will happen in the future. Third, we have the perspective, which focuses attention on the future, not in the present. In this case, no one focuses on what might happen next. They only try to contain their own cases, without considering the possibility of a cure, alternatives, or contingencies that would prevent absolutely everyone from going blind. Furthermore, foresight, This includes advanced assumptions about cases of consequences through signs or clues. This aspect was completely ignored since they only talk about the spontaneous nature of the contagion but not about its true cause. Besides, projection provides information about the trajectory, assuming the continuity of the historical pattern. In other words, if the authorities had considered the initial cases, an estimate of the spread time would have been discovered, but no one bothered to investigate. And, last but not least, preference is based on the above suggestions. It was possible to develop preference, which encompasses a series of experience-based techniques, building on the past to build the future. Therefore, perhaps with this, timely and in the best of cases, effective measures could have been taken to cope with the effects of white blindness. Ensayo sobre la ceguera is not just a novel about human condition, but also a strategic management laboratory in extreme conditions. It shows the absence of leadership, planning, and strategy can lead to collapse, while empathy, vision, literal and symbolic, and the ability to adapt enable reconstruction. Saramago's work, read through the perspective of strategic management, reveals profound lessons about the role of leadership, crisis management, and the importance of strategic thinking for survival and evolution of any organization.
As a personal conclusion, the novel Ensayo sobre la ceguera by Mintzberg is a clear example of how important strategic management is in any situation. For example, the authorities' lack of planning and vision shows the consequences of not being prepared for unexpected events. On the other hand, the doctor's wife represents good leadership by applying roles like organizing, guiding, and taking decisions, as explained by Mintzberg. In addition, the group's survival was possible thanks to basic strategies such as analyzing their environment, taking decisions, and the good use of resources. So basically, this novel was able to show us how strategic concepts like situational analysis, decision making, and resource management are reflected, showing us the importance of strategic management, especially when it comes to organizations and business.